Akevot is using a digital archive for materials we digitize in various government archives, and private collections throughout Israel and abroad. Basically documents highlighting aspects of the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We have a special focus on human rights concerns and documentation related to that. And we do that to serve the needs of human rights defenders working in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And we also use the archive and what it tells us to highlight aspects of the conflict in a way that is possibly more fact-based than the myths that we grew up on as Jewish Israelis. And additionally, we also use our work to try and remove barriers from public access to Israeli government archives, which we thought initially would be sort of a minor project for us, but grew to be pretty extensive. And all this is accumulated eventually in what we call the Conflict Records Digital Repository, which currently holds roughly 120,000 or so separate documents in the process of being catalogued. Akevot is Hebrew for footprints or traces or tracks, coming from the notion that what we are trying to do is sort of follow the footprints of the conflict to pretty much see how we got to be where we are. Our archive is not actually open for general access. We initially thought, when we thought of Akevot, we initially thought we'll just raid the archives, digitize everything, upload everything to the website, and everyone will be sort of free to roam it and see and take whatever they need. Fairly early on, we realized that this is just cannot happen. So many of the documents, when we're talking again about an active conflict, many of the documents just include details that are too sensitive to be openly released. Some documents involve persons in criminal activity or collaboration with security services. Others just have too personal health-related details. And just redacting everything is just not feasible for small organizations such as us. So right now we are providing access to human rights defenders who are sort of the main target audience for our concern. We also assist other interested persons such as documentary filmmakers and reporters, and we work with them to provide them documentation from our archive. And I hope we'll be able at some point in the future to provide sort of bigger access to general audiences, but it's still early to tell how this can actually play out. Archival documentation was never really a part of the work of human rights defenders, at least in our context. And Israeli and Palestinian human rights communities have got very good in sort of monitoring the situation on the ground, but what we at some point came to realize was that a lot of the facts that we were trying to establish by taking eyewitness testimonies or filing freedom of information requests, etc., actually can be found there in government documentation in the various archives. So we use documentation to support human rights defenders in three major fields. One is litigation. So human rights defenders going to court to protect the rights of particular persons or communities are sometimes assisted by documents we find in the archives. Documents are also served for advocacy. Some organizations upload archival documents that trace the origins of government policies they work with. And lastly, just for research. There's so much you can understand from just following the governmental and military decision-making processes related to policies that we combat on the ground every day. And the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is obviously old enough to have the archives, the government archives, at least partially open. So often we find documentation on policies human rights defenders struggle against now. You can see how they came to be, and you can track decision-making process and also internal opposition, and which all sorts of information that could potentially be useful for those who fight against it. Our initial approach was just to cast our net wide. We identified files that we thought could be of interest for our concerns, and we just digitized as much as we can. We're now gradually moving into being more specific researchers. We started off again with the main government archives, and we're now sort of venturing into smaller ones, more remote archives, which could potentially also hold very important information. And recently we started looking into international archives, archives that are based outside the country, which could possibly hold relevant information for the topics we're interested in. Well, we are an Israeli organization. And one should mention that most Palestinian archives are actually held in Israeli archives, taken during the wars, the 1982 war in Lebanon and some other situations. And our main concern as an Israeli organization, our main concern is with the actions of our own government. Having said that, much of the information that we gather from various government archives obviously reflect the sort of the thinking and the work of government officials. And we are constantly striving to see how we can balance that with a viewpoint of civilians, those who are affected by these government policies. But this is a question that I don't think we've found a satisfactory answer to yet. Basically, most of the documentation we hold is documentation that was actually properly declassified in official archives. So there's little concern there. There is, under Israeli law, a duty to have materials, documents on certain topics pre-approved by a military censor. That's the Israeli law, and it is something that we regularly do. So with documents that we publish ourselves, we submit some of them under following the guidelines that we received. We submit it to the approval of the military censor, and often it comes back without any particular issues. And in some cases, like a couple of things that are currently going on, we have a long debate with the censor on whether or not it should be allowed to be published. I think that when we started and we're trying to figure out how to combine archival work and support of human rights defenders, it was very useful to learn from the experiences of other similar NGOs or NGOs that perform similar work. And this is something that I've been pushing in recent days here and elsewhere, the thinking that it would be very useful for various NGOs or various organizations working in similar fields just to learn from the experience of others. We just turn to the internet and sort of browse through the websites of each relevant NGO that we could find. But I think it would be good especially for the younger organizations, just come and talk to us and to others who've been in the field for a while. We're obviously a relatively new organization, but there is a sort of wealth of experience already being built, and it would be good to just consult.